This is the fifth session of a 7-part series brought to you by the Student Advisory Council to the Skinny Atlas Education Foundation. On behalf of the Student Advisory Council, students Colin Morsey, Casey Clark, and Marcus McClanahan, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Speaker Series on the topic of homelessness and food insecurity in Central New York. Today we will be gaining insight from the Samaritan Center, located in our very own Syracuse, New York. Speakers in this video include Mary Beth Frey, Executive Director at the Samaritan Center, as well as Guest Services Coordinator and Jesuit volunteer Alison Baker. Thank you and enjoy.
Allison, Mary Beth, would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. So my name is Allison. I'm here this year as the Jesuit volunteer. So I just graduated college in 2020. I grew up in Snohomish, Washington, which is like 45 minutes north of Seattle. And I just graduated from Gonzaga. So now I'm at the Samaritan Center for a year, kind of immersing myself in the Syracuse community and getting to work with the guests here, which has been super incredible.
And Allison, can I add something?
Yeah.
Do you mind explaining what a Jesuit volunteer is exactly?
Yeah. So Jesuit volunteer is, Jesuits are specific sector of like the Catholic tradition. And the Jesuit volunteers, there's about 199 of us across the country, and we're all at different nonprofits. So it ranges like literally from the West Coast to the East Coast, and we all live in like community together. So I'm with 5 other folks serving at other nonprofits in Syracuse, and it all focuses on like different social justice topics. So mine's hunger relief and other social services, but we have people who are like in healthcare and people who are working with adults with disabilities, and like there's 16 or 18 different focuses. So Jesuit volunteers kind of just like come from all over. Some, like one of my roommates is from near the Adirondacks, Glens Falls. So we're all from all over the place, and we're dispersed throughout the country. So it's a, like I said, a year commitment domestically, and there's also an international program. But the international program is usually 2 years, but right now it's not running because of COVID. So,
that's awesome. That sounds like a great opportunity for people who want to pursue something that might be a little bit different after college, which is good.
Definitely.
And Mary Beth, would you like to explain your background and your upbringing?
So my name is Mary Beth Frey. I'm the Executive Director at the Samaritan Center. I've been here, it'll be 16 years in June, so I'm kind of the old lady of the place. I grew up between Amsterdam and Saratoga, if people know that area, just north of Albany, and have lived in New York State my entire life. My primary background in direct service was primarily mental health related. So I worked in inpatient psychiatric units, I worked in group homes, I did case management, I did kind of on-call crisis support. And then I worked at United Way for a while, and then came to the Samaritan Center in 2005. My educational background is I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from SUNY Oswego, and then I got an MBA from SUNY Oswego as well.
Awesome. Very interesting, and like to know that sort of stuff.
Is there anything specifically that made you want to be a part of the Samaritan Center?
Allison, you want to?
Yeah. So like I said, JVC kind of gives you the opportunity to immerse yourself in another community. And I think for me, I went into it very focused on wanting to do healthcare, and all of the like placements I initially got that I really wanted to interview with were like clinics in other parts of the country, and didn't feel right. And so I ended up at the Samaritan Center, and I think, or having the opportunity to interview with the Samaritan Center. And I think for me, what drew me here was the community aspect. From the very beginning, like you go on the website, you talk to Mary Beth, and you know the community is like so strong here. And that's like a really important belief and like moral that I hold close to my heart, is just like relationships. So I think like I ended up picking this place because I could tell how, I think hunger relief was something that like interested me. I don't have a like huge background in it, but Spokane and Seattle both have like pretty prevalent populations experiencing homelessness. And so I think for me, like having the opportunity to be exposed to something in another community that I have like grown up kind of seeing from the outside was really important. I knew, you know, I think like there's a lot of societal stigma around those experiencing homelessness and like those that utilize, you know, like meal services, things like that. That was a big reason I picked Samaritan Center, because I could tell that it was where I was able to
be. And I think for me that too speaks to kind of fundamental values of dignity and humanity, right? And how people should treat each other and how people should think about the neighbor next door, right? No matter what their situation is, they have their own story and they have their own struggles, right? And everybody needs a place to belong and to connect and to feel accepted. And I think Samaritan Center at its foundation creates that space, and it's been the most amazing job and the most amazing place to be able to come to every day.
Yeah.
So obviously what you are doing at the Samaritan Center is amazing work. Has anything been affected in the operation in regards to COVID-19?
Yeah, so I can start. I wasn't here before COVID, but I think for me, something that I've really experienced and I can tell, like we have switched from dine-in, like kind of like restaurant style, to takeout. But for me, being new and like getting to know the guests, it's been difficult at times to create those like meaningful connections with people. And I think for me, like I've really had to be intentional with the way I connect. Samaritan Center does a lot more than meals. So we have things like employment assistance, housing assistance, we do basic needs. So like we do giveaways for shampoo, deodorant, things like that. And we provide family resources, but I think ultimately like it's a place that people call home, and it's a community, and like people want that. And that's why they come here, because they can sit through a meal and talk to people. They may not know them, but from the vibe I've gotten, like that is what it is. And I've heard stories, not from staff, but from the guests. And I think that that really speaks to it. And so I think one huge thing is like the way that I've navigated interacting with the guests and like creating those meaningful connections so that we are able to build trust, and I'm able to like help them kind of reach their goals, whether it be get a job, whether it be move to a new apartment or whatever it may be. I think that's been like really important. So I think not only is like COVID created a barrier, but it's created a cool opportunity, because I think for me, like, I don't know what it was like before COVID, but it's incredible to watch people like use this place as a resource, and it's kind of a home base for our folks. And like we can't provide everything, but I think we do a really good job dispersing them into the community and helping them kind of get connected with the folks who can help them. And so I think that that's been like a really unique thing that it's been weird to navigate, but I've really enjoyed it. And I think that the Samaritan Center and like the operation has done a phenomenal job, like keeping that community feel even without them being able to come sit down.
Yeah, I guess I would add that there's, like every place, right? There's nothing that wasn't impacted by COVID. So in addition to kind of switching our model from this beautiful restaurant kind of model of sit down and share a meal with your neighbor to a kind of you're in, you get a takeout, you're out, was a significant shift, as Allison said. But we went from an operation that typically worked with the help of 1,500 volunteers a month. And we retracted that down to a core of about 80, because one, we switched operation models, but two, we needed to make sure that people weren't exposed and there was as much protection for people as we could. So we had much fewer volunteers. We typically have agencies on site that help people enroll in their programs, right? So it's much easier for someone to access a program where they're sitting across from the person that's running that program, right? You start the relationship and you start the trust. So that's kind of fundamental to a lot of our outreach services. A lot of agencies in the community kind of shut down because of safety and health concerns. So we weren't able to have those people on site. But kind of the corollary to that is we also weren't able to make a lot of referrals. And what we found was our population that we serve, their support system, which is already pretty thin, kind of disappeared in all this, right? Case managers were at home. They weren't kind of out visiting. A lot of like support groups and those sorts of things weren't running because of health and safety. So the relationships that Allison mentioned became even more critical here at Samaritan Center, because this was one of the few places that continued to operate and continued to remain a constancy for people to be able to check in and find out what was going on and still try to get some of those needs met. I think the other thing we saw was that we saw people coming to access services that hadn't in the past because of lost jobs or because of, they're being furloughed off of work or they didn't have the resources, and suddenly they were in a position to need to access food somewhere until unemployment kicked in, right? And I don't know if you guys have seen any of the articles about how cumbersome that system was for people to try to get those benefits. There were gaps for people where there weren't resources for them. And Samaritan Center suddenly became a place where they needed to go to get food. So the folks that we served were very different as well. In addition to the takeout meal, we were able to kind of put out all kinds of additional canned goods and fresh vegetables and all those other things that people, as they came through, could also take with them, with the idea that that was another resource when they went home, that they could continue to have food, right, for their families and those things. And then there was just the practical stuff, right? Everybody's got a mask on. There's so much, hand sanitizer floating around and sanitizing of the facility and all those kinds of things that was a shift too. So people were used to seeing smiles and hellos and hugs and all those things. And we had to kind of reinvent how it is that people felt connected and felt seen.
That's awesome. Very impressive how you've come from before COVID and now after it's been going on. So that's pretty cool. I have a question. I know you have a very large operation. Even though you shifted down to less employees, you still have a very large operation. But are there any tips or certain ways that teenagers can get involved in the operation at the Samaritan Center, or anything that we can do?
Yeah, I think that when you're in high school, I think that these conversations start. And I wasn't there that long ago, so I remember it very clearly. And I think when I got into college, those conversations continued, but that's really when I started to educate myself. And I think that that's really an important piece is if you're interested, whatever you're passionate about, educate yourself on it so that you can make a difference or make steps in the right direction to help whatever it is you're passionate about. But I think when it comes to just those experiencing homelessness, food insecurity, whatever it is, recognizing that those folks on the streets are people too. They all have stories and none of them are the same. There's so many complexities that they all have faced, and their past is their past. And you have to recognize that. And I think sometimes, and I've fallen guilty of this, walking downtown in Seattle, walking by someone and not even turning my head. I think that that's come with maturity, but I think I wouldn't have done that if I wouldn't have educated myself. Now, recognizing them, yes, this job has impacted that, but also during college, I became passionate about that. And I think that that's something that's really important. And so just recognizing what you do with those individual interactions matters. And I think the other thing is Samaritan Center, you can't necessarily volunteer in person until you're 18. But I think one thing I mentioned, housing assistance earlier, one program we have is My Place boxes. So when someone gets a new apartment, we kind of set them up with the essential basic needs. So towels, sheets, pots, pans, things like that. A really cool thing that I think I've seen since I've been here is some people kind of just taking on that project as a family or as a school or whatever it is. And I think recognizing your donations and people who bring things in, you don't have to be present to make this huge impact in this place, because these programs that we have set up allows people to still succeed and meet their needs. And I think that's one thing. And also basic needs. I've seen folks your guys' age kind of set up little mini basic need drives. And I think that has been so impactful. And I don't know if I'm feeling it more because of COVID, but I do think that it's made such an impact. And I think between educating yourself and finding small ways to get involved, it really is impactful and it's incredible. For me, I think that when I first started having these conversations, it was really uncomfortable. And I think we've seen that in the past year with like Black Lives Matter movements and things like that. These things that are hard, they're uncomfortable. And I think when you're your age, it's even more uncomfortable because you might not have had the conversations very often. But I think being willing to be uncomfortable is so, so important. But I think one thing that is that recognizing that some of these things are entirely out of people's control. Like, I'm thinking of one guest in particular that I've been working with since I first started, and the way he ended up sleeping outside, and he's now housed, which is amazing, but he got sick, he got cancer, and all of these medical bills started to add up, and his family kind of abandoned him. And then after his cancer, he was in remission, he kind of went into addiction from all this loneliness he was experiencing. And it's like all these things piled up. He couldn't control that he got cancer. He couldn't control that his family left him. And I think that it's really, really important to recognize like these people's lives are just like you and I, not always in their control. And I think that that's something that I've come back to a lot this year, is recognizing like sometimes I'll be talking to people and I'm like, holy crap, how all these things happen to them? They're still standing. That's amazing. And so for me, I think like just recognizing that all these things do add up. And they're people. I don't think it goes a lot farther than that. Like they're human. And like Mary Beth said, like they deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, just like all of us.
I think that's the fundamental, right? I think people create of others, right? To try to protect themselves, right? Like that can never be me. And it makes it easier to kind of think of it as something outside of myself. But I think what you learn at the Samaritan Center and what you learn just generally being is that there's very little differences between any of us, right? And some of us have been super fortunate and some of us have not. And some of us have made great decisions and some of us have made poor decisions and some of us have had things happen that no one could have ever predicted. But fundamentally, there's a human bond, right? And we are all very much the same. And we're all just lucky to be able to either be on the side that gives or to be able to be on the side that needs assistance. Both of those have value, and that person inherently has a dignity and value about them. And it's just this idea of being open-minded enough to know that situations will be different. And sometimes it works in your favor and sometimes it doesn't. And if you're lucky enough to be on the side where something's worked in your favor, you have an obligation to help somebody who might be struggling. And that's not their failure, right? That's part of life. And sometimes you're on, right? What is that? Sometimes you're the windshield and sometimes you're the bug, right? Oh, that's very true. So recognizing that, right? And then coming at the world as someone who is willing to embrace differences versus someone who's trying to create separations, I think is really important. No matter what age you are or where you are in your life, it's just remembering that people are people, as Allison said.
That's a great way to think about it.
So how many people do you think you guys help each week?
I think, I don't know this for sure because I would have needed to look at this, but I would say we serve about like between 100 and 150 people per meal on average lately. I think that it's like quite a decrease from what it was pre-pandemic, which makes sense. So I would say on average, like meals served per week, maybe like 600 to 750, depending on the time of the month. I think it's a lot busier at the end of the month typically because people get food stamps and then they sometimes run out by the middle or end of the month. And so we are a lot busier, I've noticed, at the end of the month, which that's been a really cool thing for me to learn because I didn't know why at first. But I would guess that amount. Mary Beth maybe has a better estimate.
I just winged out the calculator. So, and this will vary, right? So last year, we served about 104,000 meals a year, right? So if you do the math, it's about 2,000 a week. But as Allison said, that varies in shifts and has been been very different throughout COVID. And some of that has been a little bit counterintuitive, right? Because you here haven't been able to access food supports and those sorts of things. But what happened at the same time was folks that were on SNAP, which is the new name for food stamps, right? So it's a benefit that people get through the county and the state to purchase food. Those benefits were significantly increased during COVID. So that helped people. Typically those last about 2.5 weeks, but people got a significant amount more, which enabled them to be able to get the food resources they need more readily. The other thing that happened is New York State put a ton of food into neighborhoods, right? With the idea that they didn't want people coming into community meal sites or going to the store. The other thing that happened is seniors were able to get meals through the county and Meals on Wheels. So that particular population didn't have to come out to stores or community meal sites either. They were able to get food into their homes where they could stay safe. Children were able to get food through their school system. So that took the pressure off of places like the Samaritan Center because everybody didn't have to come here. There was sort of this broad network of food services that was just deployed right out into the neighborhoods and communities, which is wonderful. And from my perspective, right, as we look at post-COVID, some of the things that we've learned is that by increasing people's SNAP benefits and the resources they have to purchase their own food and make their own choices, they don't need to rely on organizations like ours, right? And how wonderful is that? If people can go to the store like everybody else, they don't need to come out to a soup kitchen. How wonderful is it if seniors, right, come to some place like the Samaritan Center to connect and find community because they want to, not because that's the only way that they'll get nutrition. So I'm hopeful a lot of the advocacy issues that are happening now is that some of the things that happened because of COVID may potentially continue and be like huge changes in the system that allow people greater dignity and allow people the resources they actually need to survive.
Yeah, and like going off of that, I think it's really important to know, like, not everyone we help is experiencing homelessness. Actually, most of our folks are not. So I think that sometimes that's a really big misconception. In 2019, which was like our last full year without the pandemic, it was about a little under 20% was experiencing homelessness. So if you think about that, that's like 1 in 5. And I think honestly, before I worked here, I even, like I said, felt guilty of thinking that it was a lot higher than that. But Samaritan Center, typically, like most of our folks are not in that position. And so I think it's just really important to remember that.
I know that in communities in certain places, they have food banks or other things like that. Is there anything that we can do as a school or community to help you guys at the Samaritan Center? Off the top of your head. If you don't have anything, it's not a big deal at all. Anything that you've done in the past with other people, or maybe like groups or teams, something like that?
I think some of the things that Allison talked about are really important, right? There's a lot of different ways to plug in. I think what you're doing here in terms of educating your school about the issue is really important. But I think there's also, right, these donation drives. There's what is your pantry in Skinny Atlas doing, right? And what kind of resources do they need? Whether it's us or it's another organization fighting this idea of hunger. I think it goes back to the idea of you don't know what people are struggling with, right? The kid that's next to you in science class could have missed breakfast, lunch, and not know what dinner would be, right? There are people within your community that you don't realize are struggling. So connect into the resources that are in your community. Find out what your pantry is doing. Find out if they need more resources, more supports to be able to get those things out. There are a lot of schools that have started pantries right within their school system, right? So that folks can access additional resources to be able to take home, right? And I think those things started with the idea that there might be a small need, and now there's this, this huge understanding of how many people are actually struggling that you never understood. On the college level, right, the governor mandated that every SUNY school create a food pantry for their students. And those have been overrun with students that just don't have the resources to be able to provide for their nutrition. So I think I would say explore what it is that's happening in your community, find out what the needs are, and then think about where those pockets are that maybe people aren't thinking about. And how do you create some support and some system that allows people the dignity of accessing that resource without the judgment, right, that people sometimes so quickly jump to. How do you create a space that lets people ask for the support that they need?
Yeah, those are great ideas. And obviously you've seen that firsthand with your past experiences and what's going on now. So you have a great understanding of that, and we appreciate the advice.
I think a literal thing you could do, this could be a horrible idea, but if I were in high school right now and I was doing what you guys are doing, I think one thing I would do is create a space, however you want to make that look, digital or not, where your fellow peers can ask questions. Because I think that allowing them that space is so valuable, and whether that be like a box in the middle of your hallway where they can literally drop a question and you guys figure out some way to get that out to your students, or whether it be some digital platform, Facebook page, whatever it is, I think that'd be a really cool way to create conversation and kind of get back to that education piece. Because there are things you can physically do, but I think especially with the pandemic, you're so limited in what community resources are allowing folks to be involved in, that I think like giving them a space to ask the questions that they have is important, even if it doesn't get used.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, especially the digital way, because maybe some people are embarrassed or they don't want to seem a certain way, or maybe somebody's going through that. They have food shortages themselves and they need help. So it's
definitely
a great option for that.
I have one last question. On the topic of getting involved in volunteering, do volunteers need a certain skill set in order to work at the Samaritan Center?
They do not, but they do need to be at least 18 years old. And that makes it a little bit hard to be on site if you're not quite 18. And that has to do with kind of health and safety and knives and machinery and all that kind of stuff. But no, I think what's wonderful about the Samaritan Center is it's really accessible, right? We'll teach you everything you would need to know in order to be a part of the community. I do think some of the requirements that we talk about, right, is being willing to come in with an open mind, being willing to come in open to the experience, right? And wanting to be here and wanting to be a part of creating something sustainable and concrete for folks that are looking for connection and community. So it's as much an attitude as anything else, because the skill part we can teach you.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say, like, wherever anyone ends up next, I think there's always opportunities to get involved in this stuff. And I think that is exactly what I was gonna say, was an open mind. But I think like the ability to leave any preconceived judgments at the door is like really important. Not that like someone would be able to test that before you get here, but I think it allows like anyone who's volunteering to actually like get the experience, because I think that sometimes there's like a wall up that you don't actually realize exists until you get to a space and you're interacting with guests. And I think for me, like one thing that I've really noticed is like the volunteers who engage with which all of our volunteers are this way, but I think like volunteers who are willing to engage with the guests and have those authentic conversations and like learn from the guests. Cause like, that's, I think, why I've taken so much out of my position. Like technically I'm a full-time volunteer and I sit and just like consume everything I can. And I think a lot of the things I've learned are from the guests. So I think just like dropping any preconceived notions and recognizing like everyone, I'm going to go back to it, everyone has the story. And I think that's so valuable.
Yeah, that's a great point, because everybody does have different stories, different backgrounds. You can learn a lot just from sitting down and having a conversation or sharing a meal with somebody. Yeah. Marcus and Casey, any last things that you wanted to add or ask before we close up here? And then for Allison and Mary Beth, do you guys have anything that you'd like to say, any closing remarks, or maybe one or two things that you really want the students that are listening and the teachers that are listening and the public that are listening to hear or take with them?
Go ahead, Allison. You want me to go?
Yeah, first, yeah.
Basically, thank you for allowing us to to be here and kind of talk a little bit about the Samaritan Center. But I think one of the things that I try to convey to people is that what it takes for you to make a difference in your community and in the lives of anyone you meet isn't a lot, right? It's that making eye contact. It's smiling. It's noticing that someone got a haircut. It's noticing that they're excited. It's maybe noticing that they might be a little sad today, whether that's a fellow student or whether that's someone that we're serving here at the Samaritan Center, right? It's that connecting as human beings is just amazingly important, and provides the structured community and support for everybody to thrive and move forward, right? We should all be in this together. And I think Samaritan Center is a place where you can feel that when you walk in the door and when you're a part of what we do here. And I think I'm just grateful for our community that allows us to be here. There are only 10 staff, and the rest of us are just volunteers and community members who say that it's important that we exist and that a space exists for people to feel connected and accepted, and that there's efforts to stop this idea of people being hungry in our community. And it's really simple. There's food out there. It's just helping people access the food. And any way we can do that, and any way we can create a stronger community helps all of us.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would say, especially to like students and young adults, everyone, but I think it really applies to them specifically. I think when you are passionate about something, or you don't know a lot about something, but you think you're going to be passionate about it, try it out. I have grown to love like the population I'm working with. And I honestly don't think I would have said that a year ago. That was just, I hadn't had a lot of experience like interacting with them. And I think now, like, it's something that I'm going to take with me forever. Mary Beth and I were talking about it this morning. And I think that that's something that like, I just encourage you to do, like dip your toes in the water, because whatever it is, like Mary Beth said, you don't have to do much to make a little bit of a difference. And I think that that's something that applies to any social justice topic, to anything really in life. Like you don't have to do a lot to make a difference. And I think that one fundamental piece of like what you guys are doing now is so important. Like, I don't think my high school ever had anything like this. And I think that this is so special. So like make, use of it, and encourage people to figure out like what they care about and do something towards it. Because like Mary Beth said, like we're all people. And I think fundamentally, like getting involved with something that is bigger than yourself it's life-giving. It's not like, yes, I come to work and I'm interacting with people, and yes, I'm helping them do whatever, but ultimately I go home at the end of the day more grateful than I do feel like I put in work. So I think that just recognizing whatever you're passionate about, like try it out, especially like those that are young. You have so much time to figure out what you want to do. And I think that like anything can kind of shape, like Casey, you were talking about, you don't know what you're doing next. And I think that no one ever knows what they're doing next, but it's a cool way to kind of figure out like how to continue your life, is like giving back and like figuring out different ways you can make the world a little bit better. So I think fundamentally just trying things out, I think, is really important.
Again, we would like to thank our guest speakers, Mary Beth Frey and Alison Baker, as well as everyone who watched this episode of the speaker series brought to you by the Skinny Alice Education Foundation. If you want to learn more about the Samaritan Center, visit their website, SamaritanCenter.org, featured on the Skinny Alice Education Foundation website. Be sure to tune back for the 6th episode of the speaker series titled First Generation Immigrant Experience, which will be available to you to watch on both our website and YouTube on May 19th.